Hello everybody, I'm Ellie Wildflowers and welcome to my channel. I make videos about my trailer to tiny house restoration and sustainable living. Today I want to talk about what it was like to winter in my trailer. For any of you who don't know, I live in a trailer to tiny house conversion. It's about a 40-year-old camper travel trailer, and it's like 18 or 20 feet long. I can never remember exactly how long it is. And while I've done lots of modifications and upgrades to it, the whole main structure of it is still an old trailer. I already filmed this video actually, and while I was editing it, it just turned out to be like really long-winded, rambly, all over the place, so I'm redoing it and I'm going to try to be more succinct and organized with the information I want to share. Basically, now that it's springtime, practically almost summertime, it's really hot here today in the Pacific Northwest. Now I've had time to reflect and look back on my experience, everything that went wrong, everything that I would do differently in the future wintering again in the same trailer. And the main issues of concern are insulation, temperature, frozen water, power outages, and condensation. So 5 main things that were an issue this winter. And just for reference, this wasn't a terribly hard winter. Pacific Northwest has pretty mild winters anyways. It was a bit longer than we normally have, and there was a little bit more snow than I'm used to, but it wasn't anything ridiculous. And while there were several weeks straight where there was just plain freezing temperatures, barely got above freezing in the daytime, it wasn't like Alaska crazy. So first and foremost, staying warm in the winter. I started out with just one of the Envi panel low watt heaters that are really common to a lot of tiny houses, and I really like that one because it's really not too expensive and it has extremely low energy use and it's supposed to be really efficient. And when I bought that heater, I was hoping that that would be enough, and my thought process was that I'm in such a tiny space, it's like less than 160 square feet. It won't be a problem that the heater is so tiny because I have such a tiny space to heat. However, I learned the hard way that it doesn't matter how small your space is if you have poor insulation. I didn't completely gut and re-insulate the trailer at all. The only part with new insulation was the whole front piece around the bed that I did replace because there was so much rot. I completely redid that whole area. But other than that, it has the same old insulation that it came with, which isn't great. I got to see what it was when I was doing the remodel, and all the insulation in there is pinched between the framing studs and the aluminum siding, and when you pinch insulation, it doesn't do its job anymore. So the insulation in the whole trailer is pretty poor, and then it has a lot of windows which are single paned and have plenty of cracks or places where they don't completely seal all the way around the areas where they open. And then also there's no insulation in the floor, and it is raised up, so then there's issues with wind chill and everything moving underneath the trailer. Guys, now I'm like second guessing the lighting. I'm gonna try to move around a little bit here. Oh my gosh, this is so much better. Why didn't I start this way? So after I'd had the Envi heater for a little while, I was still pretty chilly in there. I found throughout the course of the winter that the Envi heater working on its own could really only keep my space about 10 to 20 degrees warmer than it was outside. And because we had so much below freezing temperatures this winter, that was definitely below comfortably warm. And there was some times when I was pretty chilly in there. Nothing like actually gonna freeze to death. It was always well above freezing inside the trailer, but just not comfortable. So I ended up buying a really cheap classic electric space heater. And my intent with that was that I would just use it to get the space heated up to start with, and then I would be able to just use the Envi panel heater to maintain the heat and not have to run such a low efficiency, high energy use space heater all the time. And like that kind of works in theory, but there was long enough stretches of time where it was really cold outside that I'm ashamed to say that space heater was on a lot of the time. And it did keep the space warm when I ran that heater. It would get really toasty in there, but the whole issue was it was just so expensive. For my individual portion of the electricity bill that I paid out here, because we split it up among a few people, I was paying between like $80 to $100 a month on electricity during the winter. So for me, that's pretty pricey, definitely more than I anticipated or would want to pay again. And then also of note, my trailer at the time, it's moved, but during the winter, it was plugged in to my main electric source through 2 100-foot long extension cords. And I can't recall off the top of my head what gauge they were, but not the heaviest duty ones in the world. And when we went to move my trailer, which we did recently, we saw that at the junctions, the extension cords had actually been fused together, which I think is a bit of a fire hazard, as well as just damaging your products. And it just means that you're running way too much electricity through those cords over such a long distance. So those heaters, they worked well enough for the winter, but they're definitely not the best solution, and I would want to change that moving forward. And if you guys are wondering like specifically like how warm or how cold it was, I think my coldest mornings, because I would not turn the space heater on at night, I would just run my Envi heater at night. Some mornings it was probably as low as like 42, and then the way I would use the space heater is I would turn it on and get it up to 70 in there and then just turn it off, but the temperature would just plummet after I turned the space heater off. So that was the unfortunate reality of working with electric heaters in a poorly insulated space. So then moving on to issues with water and freezing pipes. So just like I have an extension cord for my electricity, I have a long potable water hose, and I only deal with gray water in there. I don't use the black water tank or my gray water tank, I just let it drain. There is a shared kitchen and bathroom set up here on the property, and I use my own kitchen, but I do use that shared bathroom. So for me, my hose freezing was definitely an issue. It never burst. It seems like the hose itself is actually maybe a little bit flexible, just to the extent that freezing water won't rupture the hose. But so there was several weeks during the winter where I didn't have running water in my trailer at all, and I would just fill up gallon jugs of water to use in there. But that was definitely a pretty significant bummer, because not having running water just makes everything so much harder, and it just feels much less like that's just one of the big deal breakers in whether your living situation feels comfortable or not. For me, running water is an important one. However, the water in the kitchen and the shared bathhouse did stay running just about all winter. There was a few, just like a couple nights or mornings where the water wasn't running in the bathroom because it had frozen, but although it doesn't really make sense to me, we never had any burst pipes. But in those buildings, we did keep heaters running, and we used heat tape and things like that. And the only reason I didn't want to use heat tape or insulation for my hose is because it was 200 feet long, and that just seemed like an unreasonable distance to try to keep warm. So maybe I'll rethink that in this coming winter, but the hose froze and there was really no way to get around that. And that also brings me to power outages. We didn't have any really bad storms this winter that left us without power for a long time, but the power did go out on several occasions, and the issue with that is that none of the heaters can run. All the heaters on the property are electric, with the exception for a couple wood-fired stoves. And then also we run off of well water, which has an electric pump. So when the electricity goes out, our water doesn't work anymore either. So that's a pretty big bummer that there's really no way to get around other than having jugs of water with you at hand, which is a smart thing to do when you live in the kind of property environment that I do. But I feel like we got pretty lucky with it this year because the electricity was never out for very long. And I have to be honest and say that there were a couple nights where the electricity was out, I couldn't run my heaters, and I was cold and frustrated, and it was an upsetting situation, and it makes you like question the whole thing when you don't have any working utilities and you're living in an old trailer out on an undeveloped property. It really makes you question why you wanted to do it. But those were short-lived moments. Those were the most frustrating parts of winter, and it's not how I feel about the whole experience in general. But they were really there, and they did really suck at the time. This is a great opportunity to give a shout out to hot water bottles. Sleeping with a hot water bottle helped me so much. Just having lots of layers, lots of blankets, and the hot water bottle to help me get warmed up to start with, which is just, if you don't know, it's like a rubber bladder that you fill with hot water. That was hugely helpful, and it made me sleep really warm every night. Highly recommend. And also because I have a propane stove, I was able to do that when the electricity didn't work. And then the final issue I had to deal with was condensation, and that was one that I really didn't think about or foresee at all. When you're in such a small space with really no ventilation and you're breathing, maybe boiling water, and the Pacific Northwest is a really humid environment anyway, especially in the wintertime when it's raining all the time, condensation was a big issue. I bought a little humidistat at some point, and it would routinely be like at or above 80% humidity inside the trailer, which is bad in terms of just feeling comfortable, because when it's more humid and it's cold in there, you feel colder. And then of course there's issues with mold and mildew growth. and I was having issues with condensation under my mattress, and I did start to see the very beginning of mold growth down there, which I know is really gross, guys. But I have one of those foam mattresses. It's not a regular one, and I think those are more conducive to mold growth. So there's some more things that I can do to kind of help circulate air underneath my mattress because it just lays on a plywood board. But things like that for me were the biggest issue with condensation is mold growing. And I didn't notice it anywhere else in the trailer except for under my mattress. And then all the aluminum frames around the windows and doors, those were sweating all winter long. I didn't want to buy a big dehumidifier like one of the ones with the condensers. Is that the word? No, I can't remember. But just because those ones, they're really loud and they pull a lot of electricity, which was already an issue with my double heater situation. And I know there's really nice high-end ones, those desiccant ones, but those are just way too freaking big and expensive for my budget. I bought a couple really small, like personal size dehumidifiers during the winter, but I really wasn't happy with either of them. They only work work very well if it's like 70 degrees or above in the environment, which is kind of a ridiculously high standard. Like, I couldn't keep my space that warm without running my space heater all the time. So they didn't really work well except for bringing down the humidity after I'd done something like boil water. They could bring it down after that, but they didn't keep it low enough to keep the window frames from sweating. So that was kind of a bummer. So, things that I plan on doing differently this next winter, assuming that I'm still in the trailer. Partway through the winter, I made insulating curtains, which I'll show you guys, and those definitely did make a really big difference, so those are a plus, would recommend and use those again. I also did that cellophane plastic stuff over the windows that you tighten up with a hairdryer, and I think that stuff did help a little bit, but not super significant. I might do it again if I feel like it. Honestly, I don't think it really helped that much. I would absolutely figure out a new heater situation. I might do a propane heater. Those do produce moisture, I believe, but if you keep the space hot enough, then I believe you would just evaporate all the moisture that you may have just produced with your heater. I think I have to do more research into that. The ideal situation would be to have a wood-fired stove because that dehumidifies and heats, but those take a pretty hefty setup and they take a lot more space than any of the other heater options, so I'm not sure if I'd be able to work that into my tiny house. Again, haven't decided what I'm going to do yet. There may be some changes made to the property this summer where I'll be able to hook my hose in to a much closer spigot, and if that's the case, then I'll definitely consider doing heat tape and insulation and see how far that gets me. But if not, then I do have a large freshwater tank and a pump inside the trailer, and those would need some work just in cleaning and making sure there's no leaks in them. But I think that could be a really good option to just fill up that tank on days when it's not freezing, and then I don't think that large body of water up inside the trailer would freeze, so I think that would be able to carry you through the freezing days when you're not able to use your regular hose. So those are two water options I see for next winter. And then as far as condensation goes, I'm really banking on just having a better heat situation that'll help me keep the humidity low or help those small dehumidifiers that I have work if I'm able to actually keep it warm in there without using a ridiculous amount of electricity. And finally, I think I would do some sort of skirting or insulation on the outside and underneath of my trailer. I'm not really convinced that just skirting alone would work that well, but I know lots of people do it. It's a common winterizing thing, so I guess it works. And then also I hear about doing things like putting bales of straw underneath your trailer as a type of insulation, so maybe I'll do something like that. I think that would probably help as well. So I know this is like a little bit of a rambly information spewing video, but I hope that if any of you guys are looking to do something similar, that this is helpful for you. Honestly, overall the winter was definitely not the best part of living out here on this property in that tiny house, but it really wasn't that bad, and I still enjoyed living in the tiny house, with the exception of a few really cold, frustrating nights. So I hope that you guys can learn from my mistakes, and if you want to see more videos about my whole tiny house journey and learning to live my values, then please like and subscribe for more videos, and thanks you guys for watching. Bye!